convinced that outside of salvation through Jesus, the single most important thing you can do to build a better life is to live out leadership principles. Just to the point. If you want a better life, if you want more joy, if you want more fulfillment, if you want richer relationships, if you want greater success in your career and the like, then I'm convinced there's nothing outside of first coming to Jesus that you can do that will give you a better life other than learning and living out God's principles for leadership. It's why we're in this series. And so in your teaching notes is a driving thought for the day. It's kind of a fill in the blank. We'll put it on the screen. Leaders arrest indifference to make a difference. Leaders arrest indifference to make a difference. See, underneath this series, we just simply believe that everyone is a leader because everyone has influence. If leadership is influence, and it is, and everyone has influence, and we do, then everyone is a leader at some level. Now, we don't all have critical positions of influence. We're not all kings like David, but we are all in a position to influence. You're in your family, you are in a position to influence, whether you're mom, dad, or one of the kids. You influence each other in the family. You're on a sports team, and therefore you're in a position to influence with your teammates or coaching or the like. You're in some work, and whether it's blue collar or white collar, you are in a position to influence one another. If you're single, you're in a position to influence in your circle of friends. And we could illustrate that all the way down to the most basic, back to peer influence, peer pressure, back in college, if some of you remember, you might even be there, or high school or middle school. When I was in middle school, we were dissecting cow eyes. Appetizing, isn't it? And we tried to influence Fred Brandt to eat a cow eye and spit out the lens. Now, he wouldn't have done this on his own, but we're such good friends. We all began to help him. Say, oh, this would be, and we started throwing money on the table. We got up to almost $5. Now, don't diss that because that was a long time ago. That's spent like $30 today. And finally, so influenced he was that he popped that eye in his mouth. When he crunched, you could hear it pop. It was, yeah, it was it. And then he spit out the lens. And then he threw up all over the place. It was spectacular. Have I helped you already? Then in high school, a group of friends were talked into borrowing chemicals from the science lab. Now, just so you know, because some of you might be concerned, was my pastor ever involved in stealing that? No, I stood at the door. That's all. I just stood at the door. And I was there to build a relationship with a teacher in case they came walking by. That's all. I was not even involved in this. And so the heist occurred. And the guys came running out of the lab and all fired up. But one of them had put pure sodium in their pocket. And I don't know if you know anything about chemicals, but it's eaten through his jeans. And it quickly ran to the very first wastebasket in the hallway, the trash, and threw it in there. And it's a big steel trash. But I understood chemistry because I was a good student. And so I decided to walk down to the cafeteria and to get a large cup, fill it with water, and then walk back down the hall. I was just sipping water. I'm innocently sipping water as I walked down the hall. And then I decided, curiously, when I got to that trash can that had the sodium, that I didn't want to drink it anymore. So I just poured it and dropped it in the trash can. By the way, any of you old chemistry students who are present, do you know what happens when water hits sodium? If you don't, here's a 12-second video of some guys who threw sodium in a little lake. This will give you a clue.
That way?
I know. Catches on fire and then it explodes.
And that's exactly what happened. All I did was just take water I was sipping and throw it in a trash can. I did nothing else. I was about 20 feet away. And then there's this massive explosion and fire up to the ceiling and smoke in the hall. And we got some time off from school in high school. And nobody, to this day, nobody has any idea. In fact, here's my confession. So, if the school wants to finally, I knew he had something. See, the best day in middle school, somebody threw up. Best day in high school, something blew up. I mean, those are just good days. And we're all influenced by other people. Now, it's not always to do stupid and bad and foolish. Sometimes you're influenced for good. Like across campuses, let me ask you, I want your hands up on this, right? How many of you have come to church because somebody invited you, or you've come to faith because somebody influenced you? Hands up across the campuses. I want you to look around the campuses. See how many people? I mean, it's massive. We influence each other. We all have influence. We're all in a position to influence. And the nature of leaders is that true leadership builds a better life. If you want a better life, then you go get the principles of leadership. It's why we're inside the story of David. Finally, having traveled into my 50s, I am able to teach on later years. I've been told I'm in my later years. And I want to talk to people today who are in their late 40s, 50s on up. If that's you, then today's conversation is for you. Often we pick an age and unique weekend teachings, and usually we're driving something younger generation or families raising kids in midlife. Okay, here's where we're going. This is a unique one. And I'm telling you, I think these are the most overlooked years in David's life. I mean, when we talk about David, we'll usually do like we did last week, and we'll talk about when he became king and his exploits and his achievements and his accomplishments and the territory he took. Or we'll go back to David and Goliath in his early years when he was young. And those are the stories we most know. But we overlook his later years, and I'm convinced that in David's later years, we will find the story of his worst moment of leadership and his best moment of leadership. There is something for us to learn. And if David could show up and give us a couple of lessons from his later years, I think he'd give us 2 lessons. I put them in your notes. The first one is arrest indifference. It's right off the main thought. The first thought is to arrest indifference. Arrest what? Sure, indifference. And it'd help if you wouldn't say it indifferently. So, say it with me again. To arrest what? Yeah, arrest indifference. I think that this is the great temptation of your later years. See, I think what happens is as you get older, you get options you didn't have in earlier years. As your kids move out, if you had kids, you get more options, more freedom. Usually you get a few more financial options when you transition toward your 50s. And when that occurs, something else occurs. A temptation to be indifferent toward the things that were once important. To become more about yourself and indifferent to others, if not even God. A second thing David would say is make a difference. Make a what, everybody? Yeah, make a difference. In other words, I think this is the great opportunity of your later years. And we will see on one side, David, by his life, warning us, don't become indifferent. And on the other side, inspiring us, make a difference. And by the way, when I say I'm going to talk to people in their later years, this is for everybody. I hope my 12-year-old Jaden listens intently and gets this. I hope my 20-something kids who are really adults, they're in their 20s, and their spouses even get this. Because the sooner you get this teaching and the longer you live it, the better life you have. Leaders build better lives for themselves and for others and for themselves. It is no accident that those who learn and live out the principles of leadership better than everybody else rise up in life and have a better life. And right off the top, David would say, arrest indifference. So let's unpack that thought. Take your Bibles across the campuses, and we're going to turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 21. Old Testament, 1 Chronicles chapter 21. Now, curiously, I I've never taught on this passage what's called the census, David taking the census. I've never taught on this. In fact, I don't remember ever hearing anybody ever teach on this. It's just not that kind of, it's just overlooked. But there's something rich in here, and you'll see that it takes a little while to understand it and why maybe we wouldn't naturally teach on it. 1 Chronicles chapter 21, we'll go through the verses. Verse 1, Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to take a census of Israel. All right, so we have an enemy, and we know that, Satan. And he works against us, and he tries to undo the very good that God wants to raise up in us. Satan was indifferent toward God, was cast out of heaven. He's our enemy on earth, and there's a spiritual war going on. You're in it, and Satan is trying to cause you to be indifferent, and David didn't see it, and usually we don't either. Verse 2, so David said to Joab and the commanders of the troops, go and count the Israelites from Beersheba to Dan, then report back to me so that I may know how many there are. Now, hang on. How is it that Satan's inciting him to take a census of how many people he has in his army? That just seems like a good thing. You're the king. You're a warrior. You got warriors. Why wouldn't you want to have a count of them? I mean, this is just statistics. This makes sense. What's the big deal? Verse 3. But Joab replied, may the Lord multiply his troops 100 times over. My lord the king, are they not all my Lord's subjects? Why does my Lord want to do this? Why should he bring, what's the word? Guilt on Israel. Okay, something's wrong. What do you mean bring guilt? How does this bring guilt? How does just counting the fighting men and having all able-bodied men register, how does this bring guilt on Israel? Verse 3, but Joab replied, or rather verse 4, the king's word, however, overruled Joab. So Joab left and went throughout Israel and then came back to Jerusalem. So notice this. Joab, the commander, recognized something was wrong with this. So this is obvious. In that time and that day, David should have known, but David was indifferent. David was what, everybody? He was indifferent. He said, I don't care. That's what he said. And so in verse 5 and 6, we see the king's command was repulsive to Joab. Now look at verse 7. We see the intensity ratcheting up. This command was also evil in the sight of God. So he punished Israel. There was a cost to this indifference. Verse 8, then David said to God, I have sinned greatly by doing this. Now I beg you, take away the guilt of your servant. I've done a very foolish thing. I've sinned. Where was the sin? Stay with me. Let me unpack this and layer this for you. Because this is a fairly complex story, and I'll try and make it simple. David became indifferent toward God. This is the beginning of the sin. He became indifferent. Whatever, I don't care, toward God. And I think the specific sin is that David's success became his security. That's how I wrote it in my own notes. David's success became his security. If you're a note taker, that's not in your notes, but you might want to jot it down. Here's what I think is happening. We're all at risk in this transition from early years to later years. Watch what I'm saying. I don't know if this is entirely true. I think this is kind of true. When you're young, your 20s, and you're rising up in career, you're all about success. And this movement, this drive to success, and as you drive towards success, as you get toward your later years, there is this combination of I want success, but I also want security. And as you move toward your later years, you become more and more about security. David was now more and more about security. He's in his 50s when this is happening. And David began to leverage his success to become his security. That is to say, the things that he could count, the things he could put his hand on, things he could materially hold. David's sin is that he began to put his trust in the size of his army instead of the size of his God. He began to lean into finding his security in the size of what he could count on earth rather than what he could count on from God. And that may seem subtle and insignificant to you. But look on the screen from Psalm 20, and this is what David wrote in his earlier years. Some trust, somewhat everybody? Trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. See, they are brought to their knees and fall, but we rise up and stand firm. Lord, give victory to the king. Who gives victory to the king? The Lord. Who gives victory to the king? The Lord gives victory to the king. God and God alone gives victory to Israel. Israel has risen up and they have great success because of God's favor and God's provision. The enemies, the other nations that fight against Israel, why? They put all their trust in their material stuff, in their size of army, in their chariots, because their chariots are their boast. Their chariots run down other armies and men like a lawnmower cutting grass. But Israel, we don't lean into and trust horses and chariots. We trust in the name of the Lord our God. See, the fool says in his heart, there is no God, and it's just a material world, and it's just us after each other, and whoever mans up and rises up and leads better than the other, they win. But he knows, and Israel knows, that there is only one God, and this God fights for you, and all your trust is first and foremost in him. David knew that the most practical thing he could do as a leader is trust God. The most practical thing he could do see, many just put God on the side, and David says, no, God's center. The most practical thing David could do as a leader is trust God first and foremost and lead Israel to do the same. The size of his God, not the size of his troops. What was happening in 1 Chronicles 20 is that David was now shifting trust ever so subtly and now putting his trust in the size of his army, and he wanted to count them. Now, there's more history than that, but that's enough to tell you what's going on. And what David was saying to all the men, able-bodied men who had to register, is they had to come from their towns. They had to register, and they were saying, okay, I'm able-bodied. I'm a servant of David. I'm in his army. See, David was reminding everybody that, hey, I'm king. Remember that. I'm king. You got that? I'm king. You serve me. And what he was saying to himself is, now how big am I? How secure am I? And this was an affront and an offense to God. And God let the consequences of David's indifference fall on Israel. And a plague fell. And it says 70,000 men died. 70,000 as the consequence of this sin. I don't know how all that played out in the emotional, spiritual intensity of it. But here's David counting, adding up what he has for his security. And in this offense to God, now the number's dropping. 10,000 men, 20,000 men less, 30,000 die, 40,000, 50, 60, 70,000. See, there is no security on earth materially. And if you place it there and shift it from God, you'll find how unstable it really is. There is none apart from him. And that indifference cost David. And David would give us a lesson, I think, that indifference is dangerous and undoing. See, I think David would say, if I could talk to you about this, what you need to know is indifference in your life is dangerous and undoing. See, this is a very rare moment in David's life. This is perhaps one of the first and only times we know of where David was confronted with it being a sin before he executed on it as sin. So Joab said to David before he sinned, this isn't like Bathsheba when out of impulse he sinned and then he tried to clean up and they came to him and said, David, you sinned. He said, yes, I did. I messed up. This is before he sinned. Before he sinned, Joab said, look, you know this is a sin. You know this is wrong. And David said, I don't care. He said, I don't what? I don't care. See, that's what indifference does to you. Indifference takes something you know you care about and you ought to care about, and it makes you say, I don't care. That's why it's so disastrous in your life. You take the most significant, sacred, and important things in your life, things that in years before you could never have thought of saying, I don't care. And now you say, I don't care. I just don't care. I'm just indifferent. I don't care. See, leaders arrest indifference because I don't care will undo every good thing in your life. That's how dangerous this was. See, David was getting older, and I don't care was increasing. Here's what I wonder sometimes. I wonder if with age we don't kind of get set in our ways, get more freedom, more options, and just start saying, well, I don't care. I don't have to care. I watch people transition because I've made the transition. I'm in it. And I see that as your kids grow up, you feel like, oh, I don't need to walk in that. I don't need to live like that. I don't need to be that person anymore. It's almost like I used to have to honor God and obey that, but now I don't have to. I just wonder if this transition almost breathes this subtle idea that you don't have to do that anymore. I'm past that. But let me ask it in this way, in a question. Has God made something important to you? Has God made something important to your walk with him in the past that you've become indifferent toward in the present? Let me say it again. Let me ask it again. We might need to write this down and wrestle with this. Has God made something important to your walk with him in the past that you've become indifferent toward in the present? See, I know people who, when they were young, raising their families, they're all about bringing them to a place of worship and honoring God and following God and giving to God and serving and being intense in the kingdom for spiritually lost people. But I watch that drift in some people's lives as they get older. I don't care. I got my life. And David's saying all leaders arrest indifference because they know indifference is dangerous. And by the way, this isn't an age thing. Indifference is dangerous, and it'll undo anything and everything good in your life. And I've told you, I've been fairly public. I'm down here in my fitness, and I want to get up here. And I've climbed to like here, and I've still got some more to go. I haven't quite reached where I'd like to be. But indifference keeps cropping up. Last week I'll just do my stuff. Last week we were watching TV, and just in the middle of the movie, I just yelled out, "I need some chocolate." I mean, it was overtaking me, and I just said it out loud, and the family looks at me like, "What's wrong with you?" "I need chocolate." "You sure?" I'm sure. And a little voice pops up on the other side. "Now, why do you want chocolate? You just did a 45, 50-minute, 60-minute workout. You're killing yourself. 2 hours ago you worked out, and now you want chocolate?" And I said, "I don't care. Go away. I just want chocolate." And so I scrounged, and I found not the biggest bag, not the smallest bag of peanut M&Ms, and I had to share. So I downed half of them. And that wasn't enough, so I went and got some chocolate chips. It was awesome. And I just kept eating them and saying, "I don't care. I just don't care." Now, in the morning, I wake up and I think, oh, what an idiot. Why do I do that? Because in the morning, in my sane moment, I cared. And now I've lost ground. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Anyone else battle indifference? It just crops up. And you know what? It'll crop up in your schooling. So you're on your way like, man, I want to be somewhere in my education. Whether you're going through schooling or you're advancing your career. And then you hit spots. I don't care. I don't want to study. I don't care. And it will undo every good thing. It happens in marriage. You're on your way to building a marriage that God has for you. And you long for companionship. You want a deep intimacy and a love for each other. But on the way, you will slide into indifference. And if you don't arrest the indifference, it'll undo every good thing you dreamed of in your marriage and in your family. It'll happen in your finances. You're building a budget. You're honoring God. You're doing the right thing. And then you hit these moments where, I don't care. Give me that credit card. And you'll just undo every good thing you have built. It happens everywhere in life. You're walking with God like David. And God's taking you to new places. And you're like, man, I don't care. It's the weekend. I don't care. I don't feel like worshiping. You know what? I don't care about serving. I don't care about giving. I just don't care. It undoes every good thing. So how do you arrest indifference? We don't have a lot of time for this, but I want to help us. And so I thought, man, let's spend a few moments. Again, I don't know how helpful it'll be, but this helps me. How do you arrest indifference? If this isn't in your notes, but you can jot it down if it helps you. I'm going to give you the ABCs, 3 things that help you arrest indifference. The first one is get out of your shoes and into someone else's. If you want to know the first practical thing you have to do, if you want to break indifference, then you have to get out of your shoes. Get out of your shoes and into someone else's. Because indifference means I don't care, and you got to break the I don't care. You got it, and here's how you end up in indifference. David sat in his own shoes too long. I have hours of background study that I could give you, but we don't have time for that. But I can tell you that David had gone through a fairly insecure season. His son Absalom had overtaken the kingdom, and David was deposed. Then when David came back, there were some Israelites, the 10 tribes that said, we have no part with David. He's not king for us. I mean, it was destabilizing. 3 years of famine. I mean, David just had some things go. And David is sitting in David's shoes and standing in David's world for so long that David starts thinking, you know what? I need to bring this thing together. I need to make sure that I'm king. I need to make sure I'm secure. I need to make sure this. And David's only thinking about David, about David, and so David justifies David's indifference toward God and everybody else because he kept standing in his own shoes. When you stay in your own shoes so long that the only perspective you have is yours, you will become indifferent toward everybody else. You see, it wasn't until the plague came and tens of thousands of other men were dying that he got out of his shoes and into the shoes of the people of Israel he was there to serve. And another man dies, and kids lost their dad, and a family lost the provider, and she lost a husband. And this is happening by 10,000 and 10,000. He's losing more men than he usually would if they'd gone to war, and it breaks him. He finally gets out of his own shoes and into other people's shoes, and he comes broken before God, and he literally just falls before God on his face. Dear God, forgive me. I've been a fool. How did I become indifferent? Forgive me. Oh God, relent. I'm the one who did this. Don't bring this on Israel. Don't do this to other people. Don't let this fall on them. I'm the one. I was the fool. And it broke his indifference because he got out of his own shoes. You know, if you don't get out of your shoes, you'll never break your indifference. That's true in your marriage. You got to get in your spouse's shoes sometimes, in your kids' shoes, in the shoes of the people around, your coworkers, the community, the world around. You got to get out of your own shoes. See, what David discovered right here, you know what he discovered? Others lose when I'm indifferent. Did you get that? Others lose when I'm indifferent. Kids lose when mom and dads are indifferent. That's why when we say how you lead your home matters, and it impacts this country and the next generation and everything that's going on, and it comes right down to, can you arrest your indifference? You know, teams lose when teammates are indifferent. Whether it's a sports team or a business, when you're in a company and you become indifferent toward the company and the customer and everyone else, and you become about yourself, you are so blind you can't even see it. And you're costing everybody. Listen, spiritually lost people who don't think they matter to God and they don't think it matters anyway lose when churches become indifferent. When churches become just about themselves, and the only decision they're making that weekend is, do I feel like going to church or not? They are so not about spiritually lost people, they're just about themselves and whether they choose to show up on the weekend or not, and then is it good? We so quickly become about ourselves, we have no idea how indifferent we drift into I don't care. You got to get out of your shoes. A second of the ABCs, we'll call this the B, pray. Pray. The most practical thing is pray yourself out of indifference. Curious to me is that David didn't pray before he made the decision, and perhaps that's how he got in trouble. And by the way, when I say pray, maybe I should say pray and put yourself in God's shoes. Maybe it should be get out of your own shoes and get in God's shoes. That's what changed things for David. Usually when we pray to vent our view to God, and that's okay. God understands. He's our Father in heaven. But prayer is more than venting your view to God. Before you're done praying, you didn't pray until you got God's view. You got to get God's view of life. You got to figure out see, David finally got God's view, and he began to see that what he did was a sin before God. What he did was violate trust of God. What he did was undo every good thing. He realized, oh my goodness, how did I do this? The very one who gave me life, the very one who made me king, the very one who's given me victory, the very one who stabilizes me in the most unstable, I have offended, sinned against him. I'm a fool. It shook him out of his indifference. And it says in verse 28 then that God answered his prayer and God stopped this plague and its impact. And you know what? When you read the power of God answering prayer, you're like, that's what I long for. And sure you do. So do I. And it's a powerful thing when you hear it happen to someone like David, but I can tell you this, it's more powerful when it happens for you. I mean, you need to be engaged in prayer and see the power of God answering prayer in your life. And you know what? At the moment I say that, you're either indifferent or engaged. And if you're indifferent toward prayer, that's what I'm talking about. It means you don't understand what's actually going on in the power of the kingdom. You know, I've hesitated for some months to share a very personal story to me. If you've been among us over this last year or so, at least since August, there's been stirring in me with the sense that God is stirring up a sense of a investment in prayer and his desire to do more. And not just in the life of this church, but maybe in the life of this territory in Greater Gwinnett. And so I've been in rather intense prayer trying to attend to what matters to God. And in the course of that in September, I was so engaged in praying over the things that seemed to matter to God and stir in me that I finally said to God at one point, God, I'm spending so much time praying about the things that matter to you. I'm not praying about the things that burden me. I don't have any time to get my own stuff. And I felt like it was an odd moment. It's never happened before. I felt like the Lord said, well, what would you ask for? And I felt impressed in the freedom to write down, never done this before, but on a list of the things that I would be asking God for if I had time. And I wrote on a big white sheet of paper and taped it in my prayer closet and just put it off to the side. And I made a list of things connected to my family. And the first one was for my eldest son and his wife, Christina. And I said, Father, you know that we've been begging you now for 2 years. They've been going through infertility. And it just breaks my heart. And I'm powerless as a dad, and all that's left now is in vitro. And I know it's $15,000, $30,000. It's, home mortgage kind of stuff. God, we're all so undone by this. I'll just tell you, I would love to have my firstborn child come naturally without any more of this craziness through my firstborn son. And I know it's a small thing, but to me it's a big thing. And you're a big God, and I would just ask for a miracle. Could you let my son and daughter-in-law get pregnant? And then would you let the baby live? Because they said even if you did get pregnant, it's unlikely you'd carry it. And I left that list before the Lord, and I didn't pray about it again. I went into my 40-day fast, and I prayed about the things that mattered to God. And coming near the end of the 40-day fast, my kids came in. And Josh and Christina shared with us the mind-blowing news that she's pregnant, which, of course, is not even possible. And when she shared that, of course, I was so messed up. I said, when did you get pregnant? And they chased it back, and they said, well, we think this date. And I took them all, my family in the closet, and I showed them what I put on my prayer list. And I said, I hadn't even prayed about it yet since. And I said, I just been praying about the things that matter to God. And look how God is answering prayer to the things that matter to us. And she's due on June 26th, and the baby's doing awesome, little Breland. And we're going to have our first baby. And I tell you that to say this. See, this baby being born is so personal to me because it's evidence of the hand and the kindness of God. He hasn't done everything I've ever asked, nor for you. What I'm saying is this: you need to have God answering prayer in your personal life, or this stuff becomes indifferent to you. The third of the ABCs to break through indifference is to make a difference. In fact, that third thought is actually our second main thought: make a difference. Make a difference in the next. Choose to use what God has put in you to make a difference in others. God's put stuff in you, use it to make a difference in others. And that's what I love in this story about David. That David, in the next chapter, says now it's time to build the house of God. And at the very place that God stopped the plague and stopped the cost of his sin, that very place of burnt offering now is being turned. And David is going to leverage and use that spot to build the temple of God, but he's not going to build it. His son Solomon is. And it says in verse 5, my son Solomon is young and inexperienced, and the house is to be built for the Lord, and it should be magnificent and a splendor for the Lord to all the nations, and I will make preparations for it. So David made extensive preparations before his death. Extensive preparations before his death. In other words, he made sure the next generation was set up to win. He made a difference. What are you going to do with what God put in you? It's the final thought. And for this thought, we're going to play a little 6 to 7 minute short film. It's a powerful film, a project that we put together with 12Stone here to remind you that all through history, people like this guy 50 years ago have made decisions about what God put in them, and will they break through indifference, and will they make a difference? This story has touched your life either directly or indirectly because somebody you know has benefited from this decision. Listen in on the story, engage it.
She asleep?
Yeah, finally. Only you would sleep when everybody else did.
I don't know. It's more time we get to spend with her. You get to spend with her. I noticed you haven't signed the papers yet. Barbara, I can't keep waiting on this.
What do they get to dictate how long it takes me to decide? Plus, I'm not convinced it's the right thing to do. It's just some theory.
It's $1 million. You and Tracy will be taken care of in case...
So I'm supposed to just sign your life away? I don't care about some big money insurance policy. I would pay $100 million if it meant that you were safe. With us. And aren't you scared? Think about our family.
I am. Imagine if it was us. Imagine if we were the ones that had to deal with this terrible thing. That the doctors told us that we had this rhesus disease. That while you were still pregnant, your body started fighting against our baby. There was nothing we could do about it. It would be a death sentence. What would you do if we knew that there was somebody who could have done something about it? Somebody with something special in their blood that could be a cure. Save our baby's life. I am scared. They're gonna inject me with this disease over and over and over again, but if they're right, if my body can actually fight this off, there's a chance they can make a vaccine.
What if they're wrong?
That's why I need you to sign the papers. Look, I am scared. But I'm terrified of what'll happen if I don't do this. Imagine how many better lives will be built because of something special inside of me. I didn't ask for this. But if I don't lead the way on this, who will? Barbara, I need you here with me in this.
It's a powerful, true story. And it begs the sobering and encouraging and inspiring question, what will you do with what God has put in you? You know, will you leverage it to make a difference? It's what David did in his final years, in his later years. It's what we can all do at any season of our life. And when James, if you will, gave his blood and engaged this process back in the day in the 60s, he had no idea how many lives he would make a difference in, including his own family. And that's what leadership does. It arrests indifference, and then it discovers that not only do others get a better life, but you get a better life. It saved his own grandson. And so if you're in the late 40s, 50s, 60s, on up, whatever, there's the temptation to embrace the world's view of retirement. Make it about yourself, become more indifferent to the world around you, and just be about you. And I think God would inspire you to do just the opposite, to join David and to know this. In your later years, you can perhaps make the greatest impact you ever made. Turn your life to still be about others and make a difference. And at any stage in your life, because leaders arrest indifference. And the very thing we get to do here as a church is make a difference. Don't embrace the world's view of retirement. Go after in your later years to make a difference. And all of us can. All of us can.